Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Lunch with Books live stream. I'll introduce our guest in just a moment. We are having some audio difficulties, but hopefully you all can hear us. I'm certainly able to hear Mr. Utley. So now, next Tuesday, July 27th at noon, the Wheeling Poetry Series continues with Carrie Connors and Jacob Stroutman. And the host, of course, is Mark Harshman, as usual. And on August 3rd, we will present the Baltimore and Ohio Stone Arch Bridges with Dan Frizzy. And that is August 3rd at noon. And that will be an in-person event. Both of those will be, although a segment of the poetry series will be on video. Okay. Robert Utley is the author of The Last Sovereigns, Sitting Bull and the Resistance of the Free Lakotas, and Sitting Bull, The Life and Times of an American Patriot. Mr. Utley served 25 years in various capacities with the National Park Service, including 8 years as chief historian. Since his retirement, he's dedicated himself to the historical writing, and his specialty is the history of the American West. Here is Robert Utley.
Well, good morning, all of you people from sunny Arizona. You're just sitting down to lunch with your book, and I just finished breakfast. That's the time distance, but we are talking today about my latest book, which is called The Last Sovereign, Sitting Bull and the Resistance of the Free Lakotas. I think before I get started on the content, it will be necessary to talk some about the title, which may not be wholly understood by listeners. I'll start by saying that Sitting Bull was the greatest chief of an Indian tribe of 19th century Western America. He was the last to lose his sovereignty. In other words, to lose his traditional way of life and be taken over by the white people. There were other great chiefs, of course. Let's talk about Chief Joseph of the Nez Perces, Dull Knife of the Cheyennes, Cochise of the Chiricahua Apaches, but they were all under the control of the United States. They had lost their sovereignty before Sitting Bull did, so he was the last sovereign in that sense. And this today is the 140th anniversary of the day on which Sitting Bull handed his Winchester rifle to Major Brotherton of the United States Army at Fort Buford, Dakota. I should explain what the Lakotas were. That's in the subtitle also. They were Sioux, but there were 7 tribes of Lakotas that were all closely affiliated with one another. They all had the same culture. Let me name them for you. There were the Oglala, the Brule, the Minneconjous, the Sans Arcs, the Two Kettles, the Blackfeet, and the Hunkpapa. Now that word Hunkpapa is going to turn up more as I talk, because Sitting Bull was a hunk papa. Their range was what is now the states of North and South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, and Nebraska. They ranged all over this country. Now, the final years of Sitting Bull's sovereignty were 4 years, 1877 to 1881. They were spent in Canada. I think before we go to Canada, though, which will be the main part of this presentation, I want to introduce you to Sitting Bull. He was born in 1831 on the Missouri, or the upper Missouri River in what's now the state of South Dakota. He was a hunk papa Sioux, as I say, and he did not bear the name of Sitting Bull in his youth. He was called Slow, S-L-O-W, Slow, until he was 14 years old. And something happened then that was unusual. You know, these people were warriors, and the Hunk Papa War Party set forth to go into Crow territory. The Crow Indians were the main enemy of the Lakotas. Sitting Bull, as a teenager, he attached himself to that war party. They let him go because he do camp duties for them. Well, they did run across a Crow party, and they charged into them. And one of them tried to get away, and Sitting Bull galloped after him, and with his war club, he smashed him on the head and knocked him off his horse. Another hunk papa killed him, but Sitting Bull counted first coup, that's C-O-U-P, and that was a higher honor than actually the killing. So it was extremely unusual for a teenager to count coup. And when he got back to the village, his father threw a great festival. Everybody came to celebrate Sitting Bull or Slow's first coup. And his father did two things. He gave him his own name, so Slow became Sitting Bull. He also was now entitled to wear a white eagle feather in his hair, and that signified the coup. So Sitting Bull was well launched on his rise as a great warrior. And by the time he was an adult, he was a distinguished warrior. Now, there were in Hunk Papa, or rather Lakota culture, there were what were called the 4 cardinal virtues. They defined manhood. The first was bravery, and Sitting Bull demonstrated bravery time and again in war with enemy tribes. The second one was fortitude. The third one was generosity. And The fourth one was wisdom. You absorb and display those 5 cardinal virtues, and you are an outstanding Lakota warrior, bravery being the most important. But from that 14 years of age, he rose into manhood as one of the most distinguished members of his tribe. So distinguished that in 1857, he was only 36. They made him the head war chief of the Hunkpapa tribe and the head chief of the Hunkpapa tribe. So he had absorbed the 5 cardinal virtues. And now, in the mid-19th century, he contended with white people. He got along, all of them got along very well with the traders that came up the Missouri and established trading posts. What they didn't get along with were the white people who came up and wanted to take their land and remake them as white people. Among the whites, the most detested were what they called the Long Knives, the soldiers of the United States Army. And the soldiers built forts all up the Missouri River. And Sitting Bull was one of the principal warriors who led raids against those forts. And they took the toll in killing white soldiers. So he spent a great deal of his life in war. The Treaty of 1868, I have to mention, it was negotiated at Fort Laramie by the Oglala Chief Red Cloud. And Sitting Bull had nothing to do with it, but it, in very significant ways, it affected his life. The Treaty of 1868 established the Great Sioux Reservation, which constituted all of the present state of South Dakota, west of the Missouri River. And the Lakotas were expected to settle on these reservations and take their food from the government in rations along with other gifts, but to be taught how to be a proper white person. But the treaty makers recognized that not everybody wanted to settle on the reservation. So they created something called the unceded territory, which lay west of the Great Sioux Reservation. And by the way, that reservation included the Black Hills. In this unceded territory, those who didn't want to settle at the agencies were free to continue to hunt the buffalo as long as there were any buffalo to hunt. So this really did divide the Lakota people into those who were called agency Indians, and those which included Sitting Bull as the principal leader. They were called winter roamers because they roamed in that unceded territory throughout the entire year. As I mentioned, Sitting Bull was the principal chief of the winter roamers, and he discovered in 1873, he and his people, that the Yellowstone Valley, which was an inherent part of Lakota territory, there were surveyors of the Northern Pacific Railroad advancing into it. And in 1872, the second one of these, there were surveyors coming from the west, and they had an army escort, and the Lakotas stopped them and fought a battle with them. This was called the Battle of Arrow Creek near Bozeman, Montana. The soldiers were in the Yellowstone Valley, and they used an old riverbed as a barricade to shoot at the Lakotas. And this was a place that the people remembered as Sitting Bull's bravest act. While they were exchanging fire, Indians and soldiers, Sitting Bull gathered his pipe, tobacco, and all the other regalia that went with pipe smoking, and he slowly slowly walked out in front of the Indian lines, calmly sat down, and started filling his pipe. Bullets all the time were singing overhead and plowing up the dirt. And as he was preparing to smoke, he shouted, "All who wish to smoke with me, come forward." And from his lines came his nephew and 3 others, and they nervously sat down and filled their pipes. Sitting Bull calmly smoked all of the tobacco in that pipe bowl, then carefully cleaned it out, got up, and slowly walked back behind the lines, all the time bullets. Well, his companions ran back so fast that they left. One of them left his regalia on the ground. But this was indeed a brave act, and it was long remembered in Lakota memory. The next year, 1873, the surveyors came again, but this time it was not solely infantry, it was cavalry. And the cavalry was commanded by an officer that they came to know as Long Hair Custer, George Armstrong Custer. This time, they fought 2 battles with Long Hair, and he won both of them, which was a humiliation. Not only that, but the next year, 1874, Long Hair explored the Black Hills, and they found gold, which set off a great gold rush to the Black Hills, which violated the Treaty of 1868. That gold discovery set off an effort by the United States government to buy the Black Hills from the Sioux, and they wouldn't sell. And this conflict, this failure, because the treaty bound the United States to keep gold seekers out, and they couldn't do it. And so the government decided to make war on the Lakotas, allied with the Cheyennes. And I won't go through all of that, but on June 25, 1876, in the Little Bighorn Valley of Montana, there were 7 separate tribal circles, 6 of Lakotas and 1 of Cheyennes. A very large gathering of Indians. And on this day, they discovered soldiers coming down the valley against the tribal circles, and the Hunkpapas were those, Sitting Bull and his Hunkpapa, the ones at the upper end of the village. But the soldiers just fired, they didn't attack, and they were driven back across the river. That was the first conflict of the Battle of the Little Bighorn. The other was 5 miles down the river, and that resulted in the death of Longhair Custer and 210 soldiers. Now, I tell you this because by this time, Sitting Bull had gained the reputation all over the United States, the people and the army also, as the leading hostile Indian. He was to blame for the death of this hero, George Armstrong Custer. He was the man to get because he was responsible for that. And so the army set out to try and get this man. He led a following of about 1,000 Lakotas north across the Yellowstone River, and there was a buffalo herd. They were going to hunt buffalo. But all of a sudden, soldiers appeared. And that led to a negotiation between Sitting Bull and the officer who led those soldiers. And he was attired in a long coat trimmed in bear fur. So this officer came to be known to the Indians as Bear Coat. He was Nelson A. Miles, Bear Coat Miles, and he was going to figure in Lakota history for the next 4 years. All the winter of 1876-77, the Lakotas ran all around northern Montana along the Missouri River trying to escaped from Bearcoat's soldiers. Finally, in the spring of 1877, they faced a decision of what to do. Well, Canada. That was the answer. That's what they decided. There was the international boundary, which the Indians called the medicine line. It was sacred. When you crossed the medicine line, you were free. Bearcoat could not cross the medicine line. So he was in Canada now, and the blue coats, the long knives, were no longer a part of their life, but they met policemen attired in scarlet coats. This was the Northwest Mounted Police. And on May 10, 1877, Sitting Bull met the principal redcoat that he was going to deal with during his time in Canada. This was Major James Morrow Walsh, and he was an important policeman because he had built Fort Walsh, and his assignment was to meet all of the Indians from the United States who may have crossed the border. Two chiefs, Four Horns and Blue Moon, had already passed before Sitting Bull and his 1,000 people got across. But on May 10, 1877, Walsh and Sitting Bull met. And thereafter, Walsh was the officer who was responsible for Sitting Bull. They got along fine. Walsh explained to Sitting Bull the conditions on which the White Mother, Queen Victoria, would let them stay in Canada. They had to follow the laws and the rules of the White Mother. They must not go back across the border for anything, and if they did, they would lose their right to settle in Canada. Sitting Bull and Walsh, at first they understood each other. As the time went on, month after month, they grew to trust each other. Major Walsh was the only white man that Sitting Bull ever trusted, and they became friends. Walsh had a high regard for Sitting Bull. I want to read you what he said at one time. He said, "In my opinion, he is the shrewdest and most intelligent Indian living, has the ambition of Napoleon, and is brave to a fault. He is respected as well as feared by every Indian on the plains. In war, he has no equal. In council, he is superior to all. Every word said by him carries weight and is quoted and passed from camp to camp. So that gives you a good idea of Sitting Bull's abilities. Well, the mounted police had welcomed the Lakotas to Canada, but that wasn't Canadian policy. They wanted to get them back in the United States, and they did not want to go, and the police had welcomed them. So this became a major issue between the United States and Canada. It became a diplomatic issue. In Washington, the Canadian representative, they called him the Charge d'Affaires, negotiated with the United States State Department to figure out how to get those Indians back to the United States. The Canadians wanted the United States to ease its requirements for their return. That meant no guns and no horses. They had to surrender them. Of course, they're not going to do that. And Canada argued that the United States should ease its requirements in that regard. Well, they couldn't agree. And finally, the president, Rutherford B. Hayes, formed a commission with General Alfred Terry, the head of it, to go to Canada and talk to Sitting Bull and the Lakotas. When Major Walsh said to Sitting Bull they were living 120 miles west of Fort Walsh, said, please come in and talk with the American general. He said, no, I'm not going to talk to any American and all of the bad things they've done to us. We are not going to go back. Well, Walsh says the white mother wants you to go and talk to them. And nobody ever declined to do what she wanted. So they traveled the 120 miles to Fort Walsh, and they had a big meeting in the dining room with a lot of officers present and General Terry, a lot of chiefs. And they had buffalo robes they put down for the chiefs to sit on, but there were tables there for the Terry Commission to sit behind. Sitting Bull rose and said, you come and sit here. Terry said, white people are used to sitting on chairs. Sitting Bull said, we can't see you up there. So they brought their chairs around and sat down there. General Terry got up and he had a long document from the president. And he read it slowly, and it was interpreted. And finally, he said, General Terry said, you think over this very carefully. We want you to come back, but you have to surrender your guns and ammunition and be just like the others who have surrendered and go to an agency and settle down. Sitting Bull got up. Terry had told him to consider this very carefully, but Sitting Bull got up and he said, "Don't say 2 more words. Go home where you came from. We are going to stay here and we are not coming back." And the mounted police, they chiefs all shook hands with them very vigorously, but they neglected the Americans, wouldn't shake hands with them. Well, the Terry Commission failed, and the Lakotas continued to refuse to go back. But as I said, they had a problem of food. The buffalo had always supplied their food. But as the Canadian officers explained, the buffalo were declining, and Her Majesty's government was not going to feed them. The other problem was that there were Canadian Indians who relied on those buffalo and who were hostile to these newcomers and them hunting their buffalo. So Walsh's mission was to keep on talking to Sitting Bull and trying to persuade him. The years went by, 77, 78, 79. The buffalo were declining. People were going hungry, but across the river in Montana, the buffalo were more numerous. So Sitting Bull and his people went across the boundary to hunt buffalo, even though they had promised that they wouldn't do that. But they got away with it because they were hungry and they could say, "Our children are hungry, we have got to feed them, and we will go to where the food is." Another problem with going across the boundary was Bearcoat Miles and his soldiers. Their orders were to stop any Indians from coming across the boundary. And in 1879, in July, Sitting Bull and some of his people were on Milk River at the mouth of Beaver Creek. And the hunters, most of them, had headed back to Canada, but Sitting Bull stayed with his peoples to gut the buffalo and skin them and prepare the meat to be transported back. Well, across the river, they saw horsemen coming down, and their rifles had red handkerchiefs on them. So they thought these Indians wanted to parley. Well, they didn't. They were Crow Indian scouts for Bearcoat Miles. And those red handkerchiefs were to identify them for the soldiers. They were Crow Indians, and there was a big one. His name was Magpie. He was a huge Indian. He was the son of a chief and was well known as a warrior. He came out under a white flag, and he said to the Lakota who came out, he said, "Is Sitting Bull with this group?" Yes. I want to engage him in personal combat. So Sitting Bull came out on his horse with his rifle, and Magpie closed on Sitting Bull with his rifle. He shouldered it and aimed and fired at Sitting Bull, except that his rifle misfired. Sitting Bull did the same. He aimed and he shot. Magpie fell off his horse, dead. Sitting Bull rode up, got off, scalped him, got back and took his horse and rode away. Well, the battle really didn't develop because Miles came up with the main command. Then he had cannon and shot it at the Indians, and they retreated and went back. Miles followed them as far as the border, but he couldn't cross, and Major Walsh came and talked to him. Well, by 1880, the people were really going hungry. And there was great pressure to get Sitting Bull to go back and surrender because there they would feed him. He would not do it. But many of the chiefs of the other groups that were following him, they peeled off and they went back and surrendered. So his following was reduced. Finally, in 1881, when they were really starving to only 200 people, and the Canadians would not ration them. And finally, Sitting Bull moved his people from Wood Mountain, the place where they had spent the last 4 years, moved them to a little town called Willow Bunch. And there was a trader with a trading post that Sitting Bull knew well. His name was Jean-Louis Légaré. And he had a whole train of carts. They called them Red River carts with 2 wheels. Jean-Louis tried to persuade Sitting Bull to ride in those carts to Fort Beaufort and surrender. And Jean-Louis would feed them en route. Well, part of Sitting Bull's party following got on the carts and went to Fort Beaufort. So his following was less and less and less. At last, Jean-Louis said, "I'm not feeding you anymore. You take your people and go with me to Fort Beaufort on the next trip." Well, it was awfully hard for him to make that decision, but he did. And his people loaded onto the carts, and they went part way, and Sitting Bull and his people got off, and they said they weren't going. They were going back to Milk River or somewhere else, which of course was totally unrealistic. There were just these 200 people, and they were starving, they were impoverished, they had ragged clothes. So Jean-Louis started the trains moving again, and Sitting Bull and his people got on. And Jean-Louis sent a messenger to Fort Buford and said they're on the way in. So Major Brotherton sent a train out with food to meet them, and they stopped and had a feast. But they got to Fort Buford. They entered on the parade ground on July 19, 1881. They were put in camp overnight. Sitting Bull said to the major, I want to give you my Winchester tomorrow. So on July 20, and that is the 140th anniversary today, he and his son Crowfoot seated themselves in Major Brotherton's quarters, the major on the other side, and Crowfoot, Sitting Bull, handed the rifle to Crowfoot and said, give it to him. And I will read to you what he said. I surrendered this rifle to you through my young son, whom I now desire to teach in this manner that he has become a friend of the Americans. I wish him to learn the habits of the whites and to be educated as their sons are educated. I wish, and this is the important thing, I wish it to be remembered that I was the last man of my tribe to surrender my rifle. This boy has given it to you, and now he wants to know how he is going to make a living. So right there, when he handed that rifle to Major Brotherton, he lost his sovereignty. The last sovereign, the last of the big important chiefs to lose his freedom to live as he had always lived. And now he had to live as the white people live. Well, they put him and his people on a steamboat and took them down to Standing Rock Agency, where all of those who had surrendered before had been settled. They renewed their friendship with them, but then they discovered they had to get back on a steamboat, and they were taken way down the Missouri to Fort Randall. and made the camp as prisoners of war, which was really a thing that was broken promises. They were there at Fort Randall for 3 years. In 1883, a steamboat brought them up the Missouri River to Standing Rock Agency and put them ashore. They now had the home at Standing Rock. And this was not a happy experience for Sitting Bull. He was a chief, and he knew he was a chief. But there was a man called McLaughlin, who was the agent for the Standing Rock Agency. He, of course, was the chief because he controlled the rations. There were Indian police who were the enforcers. There were Indian judges who ruled on what was called the list of Indian offenses. You know what those were? Indian dances were offenses. Many other customs were Indian offenses, and if they were guilty of Indian offenses, the Indian police could bring them before the Indian judges, and there were schools to make them learn how to live as white people, and there were churches to teach them a new religion, quite at contrast to the old worship of Wakantanka, the great mystery. So this was a whole new life for Sitting Bull and his people, and he did not take it too well. He had a big argument with the agent over who was going to be chief. And there were meetings in which it was apparent among the other Indians that Sitting Bull was still the chief, but it was McLaughlin who ruled the roost there. There was a big question in the next few years over dividing up the Great Sioux Reservation into individual agencies in which the Indians would surrender their land. Sitting Bull fought this, and it's a long, drawn-out story, but he lost, of course. The final drama in Sitting Bull's life was the ghost dance religion. It swept all of the Western Indian reservations in 1889 and 1890. It promised that if you danced a certain dances, you might die and go to live with your ancestors in a world that had no white people in it. And the ghost dance came to Standing Rock. Sitting Bull saw it as a means that he might regain some of his lost power. So he became an apostle for the ghost dance religion. People would gather at his cabin on Grand River and dance. He didn't dance, and he probably didn't believe it. But finally, the commanding general of the military division in which Standing Rock and the other agencies existed, said that chiefs that might make trouble should be withdrawn. And the head of the list was Sitting Bull. And you know who that commanding general was. It was Bear Coat Miles, who was now a major general. And he wanted Sitting Bull brought out, and he wanted him arrested by the cavalry at nearby Fort Drum. Well, McLaughlin and Drum believed that the soldiers would only make trouble and that the Indian police ought to be the ones who made the arrest. They outwitted General Miles by going directly to the president. And on December 15, 1890, Indian police, it was a wet, cold, dark morning. Indian police came into Sitting Bull's village and into his cabin and placed him under arrest. He was supposed to be mounted on a horse that was brought up. It was a gray horse, his favorite. It had been given to him by Buffalo Bill when Sitting Bull one time went with Buffalo Bill's Wild West. But the horse hadn't been brought up. They took three policemen took Sitting Bull out in front of his cabin, but they had to wait for the horse. Meanwhile, all of the people in the village gathered, and one, Catch the Bear was his name, said, "You will not take our chief." And he aimed his Winchester and he fired. And when the shooting was all over, 2 policemen were dead, and the third one had shot Sitting Bull in the back of the head. So you had 3 people lying on the porch. That was the end of Sitting Bull. That was the end of him, except as a long remembered great man. Sitting Bull was the last sovereign to surrender, and he ended up on his front porch dead. I should mention, though, Major Walsh, his superiors didn't trust him with Sitting Bull. They came not to trust him because they were such friends that they thought that Major Walsh was probably encouraging him not to surrender, which wasn't true. In 1883, Walsh was forced out of the mounted police, and he spent the rest of his time in Canada as the head of a coal company that was aiding the construction of the Canadian Pacific Railroad. But in 1897, the Klondike Gold Rush brought Walsh back into the mounted police. Only briefly in the Klondike area. he was forced out there. He retired. He went back home, and he died of a heart attack in 1905. So that's the story of a friendship between an Indian and a policeman. And I think I might try to answer any questions. There he is. Thank you for a fine preservation. Does anyone have a question? Maybe not. Well, that wasn't such a great. Oh, when Magpie challenged Sitting Bull, why did they use rifles? That was the principal armament of any warrior who could obtain one. The Winchester rifle, as you know, was a repeating rifle, and it probably was the best one on the market then. Almost all of the warriors by that time had acquired Winchester rifles. They were easier to acquire than the ammunition. I've truly enjoyed you, Mr. Utley. Well, thank you, whoever that was. Thanks for sharing, Carrie. Well, these aren't questions. I'm glad that you folks enjoyed it. Your Midwesterners were way out here in the desert, and I haven't finished my breakfast yet. What became of Bear Coat? I should tell you that Bear Coat Miles was an intensely ambitious man whose wife was the niece of General William T. Sherman, the head of the U.S. Army. And Miles thought he could get up by the influence of his father-in-law. General Sherman did not give him what he wanted because Sherman didn't believe in nepotism. But Miles advanced to brigadier general and then to major general, and finally, by seniority, he became the last commanding general of the U.S. Army, because at that time they went into the chief of staff system. And the president, when he retired, was Theodore Roosevelt. And he wouldn't go to Miles's retirement ceremony. He said, that brave peacock, which he was, is finally out of our way. Why so many broken bottles? Was it all about money? It was not all about money, although money played a part. The basic thing was that we white people at that time wanted them to be like we were. And of course, to give up their land. So there was this whole system of treaties, which nobody understood, but they signed them anyway, giving away their land. The last sovereigns They were the last sovereigns. They gave up their freedom, which meant that they did what the U.S. government wanted them to do. They wanted to make them learn to farm. They wanted to make them fear God and be good Christians. They wanted them in every way to be like we were. And there are still reservations, but the occupants of those reservations are nations in their own right with their own government. But, it is regarded today as a very sad and sorry act that we did with the Indians. But the question comes back to the two sides couldn't live together, and the white people had the power.
Okay, I don't know if you...
Okay, thank you, Old Bison. Yes, I am Old Bison. And that's what they consider me in the historical profession, an Old Bison, because I am 91 years old and I have written 25 books about Indians and soldiers and other subjects.
Thank you, sir.
So it's been a pleasure to join with you, and now I will be liberated to finish my breakfast and read the morning paper.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. We'll see you next week.